I'll be out here this morning. The title of my sermon is The Last Laugh. I guess I should have named it something I could not at least read or know, right? Why did Sarah laugh, and what does her laughter tell us about our relationship with God? I love to laugh. I was on Facebook the other day, and I was just scanning through stuff like you do sometimes, wasting time. And there was a segment on there from Family Feud, the dumbest answers on Family Feud. And I was laughing so hard that it was really, and I love to laugh. I love to laugh. I love to have fun. I love to tell little stories. And there was a squirrel in the yard. He was spreading his arms to heaven. And he says, I try to come up with a squirrel pun, but everything I thought of was nuts. Mary said these were corny.
That was good.
A bear resting at the zoo. Life is hard. I barely made it through this week. Thanks, Mike. In our text today, we read about a woman who laughed. And I got to thinking about laughter this past week, and of course I scoured the internet on the subject. I found that there are actually scientists who study why we laugh, and they write books about it. One such scholar noted, laughter is part of the universal human vocabulary. Every human understands it. Unlike English or French or Swahili, we don't have to learn to speak it. We're born with the capacity. In fact, the first laughter appears at about 3 to 5 months of age, long before we're able to speak. My little granddaughter, we went to a family thing on Thanksgiving, and the kids had one of those little racetracks, one of those little Hot Wheels racetracks. And my granddaughter was giggling at that so hard that everybody in the room was just falling down laughing because she was having such a good time. Every time they would let them cars go, she would just laugh hysterically. One of the remarkable things laughter is that maybe you don't know about this. It occurs unconsciously. You don't decide to do it. We don't consciously produce laughter. That's why it's very hard to laugh on command or to fake a laugh. Another scientist said nervous laughter is a physical reaction to stress, tension, confusion, or anxiety. People laugh when they need to protect their dignity and control during times of stress and anxiety. In these situations, people usually laugh subconsciously, and they attempt to reduce their stress and calm down. However, it often works otherwise. And that's taken from a book called Psychology Studies. Now, neither of these experts that I just read about were even thinking of Sarah when she laughed. But they perfectly described her situation. Here she is in the family tent, and she's been listening to a conversation between her husband Abraham and his guest. I'm convinced she did not know who these 3 visitors were, but as the conversation unfolds, it's pretty clear or obvious that God's one of them, and the other 2 are angels. Now, just so you understand what her emotions were like at that point, it helps to realize God had made this same promise of a child 4 times already. 25 years previously, in Genesis 12:2, God promised Abraham, I will make you a great nation. Then in Genesis 13:6, God says, and I will make your descendants as dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. And again in Genesis 16:10, he writes, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so they shall not be counted for the multitude. Sorry. And in Genesis 17:4 it reads, "As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be a father of many nations." Now it's hard to become a great nation, have offsprings, and have descendants if you don't have kids. And God's been making these promises for the last 25 years. Now Sarah is 99 years old. When it comes to having babies, her ship has sailed. Women her age just don't get pregnant. But there is God making the announcement that by this time next year, he's telling Abraham, she's going to have a son. And Sarah laughed to herself. Now I've been reading several sermons on this text, and most of the preachers imply or outright said that her laughter was her way of saying, yeah, right, like that's going to happen. As if she was laughing in ridicule of God at what she'd heard. But I've always had a problem with that understanding of it. I've been more inclined to believe that her laughter was like what those experts described, uncontrolled and nervous laughter. Yeah, there was probably some doubt in her mind. I mean, she's a 99-year-old woman. She knows she can't get pregnant, but I think she still has faith in God. And I think she's confused, maybe stressed, and bewilderment is setting in, because it's hard for her to believe that because of her age. In fact, there are so many emotions at work in her that her nerves get the better of her, and then she laughs. And you can't blame her for that. Now, God does call her out on it. He asked Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? But I'm not convinced he was angry with her. And part of that reason is I don't think that is because he didn't punish her. He just called her out on it. He didn't punish her. In the Gospel of Luke, where it talks about a priest, Zechariah, and his wife, who are eventually the parents of John the Baptist, who were both well on in years too, and an angel appeared to Zechariah and said, you're going to have a son named John. But Zacharias apparently wasn't buying it. How do you know that? Because the angel tells Zechariah, behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words. So God kind of put a punishment on Zechariah. But he didn't punish Sarah. Why not? I think it was because she really did believe. She was just confused. She was stressed out, and she really does want to believe. But this whole situation makes her nervous. Not knowing what was going to go on, because she's 99 years old. She'd been pregnant before, but not at this age. So she didn't know what was going on. But she really believed. And I go along with the experts. I think it was nervous laughter. It was subconscious attempt to reduce the stress and to calm down, thinking about what was coming. When God asked, why did Sarah laugh? I don't think he's rebuking her for unbelief. I think it was his way of challenging her, letting her belief come up. He knows she's been listening in, and he knows she's struggling in her faith. And so he acknowledges the conflict in her mind. And he says, you laughed. But then he said something that Sarah needed to hear. And that's found in Genesis 18:14. And we need to hear this too. I'm only going to read the very first part of it. Is anything too hard for the Lord? I'm going to say that again. Is anything too hard for the Lord? You know, Sarah isn't all that much different than a lot of us. We know that God can do whatever he wants to do. We know that. But when life turns sour, when the walls start crashing in on us, and we've all been in this situation, there's no rational reason to believe life will get any better. We struggle. We've all been there. When we all know there are times when answers to our situation are illogical. But sometimes we think it might have to be a miracle, irrational, or even an impossibility. How many times have we prayed for someone that got very sick and they were okay? And we thought to ourselves, they don't have a chance. You know, just like you guys thought when you went against the city for this building, same thing. Not a chance. It's not going to happen. And a 99-year-old woman getting pregnant would seem to maybe fall into that category, do you think? Sarah's struggling with this, and there will be times in our Christianity when we're going to struggle too. One of my favorite passages of Scripture is in the Gospel of Mark, where we're told that a man has brought his demon-possessed son to Jesus and says, to back up the story a little bit, it's his son often throws himself into the fire, he throws himself into the water. But if you can do anything, this father says, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said to him, if you believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help me with my unbelief. You know what that man was really saying? He's saying, I'm struggling with this. I've tried everything and nothing has worked. And I'm not even sure if you can fix it. I've got this unbelief setting in the back of my mind. But if anyone can do anything, I believe you can. So I believe. But help my unbelief, is what he's saying. Jesus said, with God all things are possible. And again, Christ said, everything is possible to him who believes. Or as God said to Sarah, is anything too hard for me? Let's look at something God said in Isaiah 50, verse 2. It's a very powerful question. Is my hand shortened at all that it cannot redeem? Or let me paraphrase. Is my arm too short to ransom you or reach you? Do I lack the strength to rescue you? Imagine if you were a 5-foot tall woman trying to reach something on the top cabinet in her kitchen. She tries standing on a chair, but even then, she can't quite reach it. It's impossible. But she has a 7-foot tall basketball player's son, and she turns to him and says, would you reach that for me? I can't do it, but you can. And really, when you look at that story, isn't that what our faith is all about? Our faith is all about believing that God's going to do things that we can't do. It's recognizing God's arm is not too short. Here's the deal. God puts our faith in prayer up on a shelf, on a top shelf. He puts it up where nobody would ever think you could reach it, but you always know it's there. And why would God do that to us? Well, if you could do it all on your own, then you wouldn't need to pray, would we? And if you could reach it on your own, why would we need God? We need faith in prayer. We need to know that God's there. And we need to use that prayer to communicate with God. In Hebrews 11:6 it says, but without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. God rewards those who are willing to ask him to reach the stuff on the top shelf. What I find interesting about this story about Sarah is this. When God first calls her out for laughing, do you remember why she denied she laughed? She was afraid. She's probably even ashamed that she laughed. But that shame doesn't last very long, because eventually her laughter becomes part of her story. How do I know that? Well, what does Sarah name her new son? Isaac. Do you know what Isaac means? Isaac means laughter. Can you visualize another woman coming up to Sarah and saying, "That's a handsome boy you have there. What's his name?" And she responds, "Laughter." And the other woman is a bit shocked and says, "Why on earth would you name him that?" And Sarah responds by saying, "Well, let me tell you about that. Every time someone asked her about that name, she could tell them about the miracle that God performed. She can share how she laughed when God told her he'd be born. And she can share how God did something miraculous in her life. It's part of our story. Do you use your life story to tell people about your Lord? Not enough, probably. I know I don't do it enough. Sometimes we can use our life story to tell people about God and about what he's done in our lives. There's an old saying that goes, "They who laugh last laugh best." As I researched that expression, I found one source that said it meant the final winner will have more glory than someone who was winning in the beginning but ultimately lost. Sarah literally had the last laugh. God did the impossible in her life, and she had the last laugh because God gave that laughter to her. Sarah says in Genesis 21:6, "God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me." Now, we serve the same God. Do you think he can give us the last laugh as well? That's hard to say, I'm sorry. Of course he can. But how do we know that? And the answer is because only God has the power to give us that last laugh. Researching for this sermon, I ran across the mention of God laughing found in, you can look it up later. I'll read the part that it says, but it's in Psalms 2, 1 through 7. Read that when you go home. But it says, "He who sits in the heavens, shall laugh. The mightiest rulers on earth set themselves up against the Lord of heaven, and they declare, 'You can't tell us what to do.' And it's like God is replied in his reply, 'Don't make me laugh. You wouldn't like me when I laugh.' Do you really think you have the power to take me on?" And God would say, "I don't think so." You see, God laughs because he will have the ultimate last laugh. He declares to us, "Is my hand shortened at all that it cannot redeem? And I have all the strength you'll need for me to rescue you." He's more powerful than any force on the face of this earth. And the reason we're assured of that is because he's laid claim to you. And do you know when he claimed you? He did that when Jesus died on the cross and rose from the grave. That's when he laid claim to us. Now that's really intriguing about Psalms 2. That is the message of the Psalms. First, we're told God laughed at the mighty and the powerful of this world. He mocks them because he is so big and so strong and so mighty. There's nothing that he can't do. And they can't stop him, nobody could stop him even if they wanted to. But then we're told why that's true and why we can rejoice and laugh with joy. And it's in the 7th verse, because God declares, "The Lord said to me, you are my son, today I have begotten you." Talking about Jesus. His son, he begot. His begotten son. And where have we heard that before? One of the very first verses that I ever memorized in my life was John 3:16. You guys probably memorized it too. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." At this point, I was kind of convinced that this sermon was ending, and you probably wish it was. I was prepared to wrap it up, but then something came to me. But then I saw something that was so obvious I had missed it before. Now I want you to pay close attention, because it's worth the price of attendance. You ready? What did God promise to Sarah? A son. And she laughed. In Psalms 2, God laughed, and then he made us a promise. And what was that promise? His only begotten Son. How neat's that? Victory in Jesus, that was the song that we sang, and I put it on the list of one of my favorites. And the chorus goes, "O victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew him, and all my love is due him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood." That's a great song, especially that chorus. In closing, I want to give you a little footnote to the lesson. It happened in chapter 17. But it was before we were told that Sarah laughed. And we read in 17:17, "Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born to me who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" The last laugh is ours to be had if we hold true to God's word. I want to make one more very important point about this lesson, and that is that God will not be laughing when he has to condemn those who would not obey him to hell. Because God deeply loves you and me. And he wants every one of us to be saved. If this lesson has touched you in such a way that you need to come back, or come back and fix your life and need the prayers of the church, or if you need baptized, we can do that. Contact us and we can arrange that for you. Please come as we stand and sing.